Rain slid from the brim of Linda Nielsen's borrowed mantle and down the back of her neck, cold as melted iron, while the queue at Halberd House inched forward beneath lantern light and polite contempt. She stood with the other late arrivals, though she did not belong among them, except by legal fiction, her shoes soaked through, her hem dark with slush, her fingers numb inside gloves worn thin at the seams. A woman under a peacock blue shawl glanced once at Linda's face, and then at the sisters ahead of her, and the glance carried the whole verdict of the street: plain relation, tolerated expense, nobody worth noticing. Linda kept her chin level and watched her own breath turn pale in the rain. Her dark hair had been pinned too tightly by hurried hands in an unlit attic mirror. Her scalp stung where the comb had torn skin. Her eyes, large and watchful, had the strained brightness of a sleepless animal. Lady Nielsen had ordered her to walk behind the family carriage from Hanover Square to keep mud from splashing the stepdaughter's skirts. So Linda had walked, through sleet, through carts and shouting and horse steam. She had arrived with wet stockings clinging to her calves and pain flashing at each step where a blister had burst. Nobody in line asked why her mantle did not match her gown. Nobody asked why she trembled before she even crossed the threshold. A footman lifted the velvet rope. Warmth spilled from the open doors in a wave of music, candle wax, and orange blossom perfume, and then vanished as the doors closed again on her back. Inside, the marble hall shone like ice. Servants moved in patterns she knew too well. Trays lifted, cloaks collected, names announced in full voices that gave rank a body. Lady Nielsen sailed forward under crystal light, silk whispering at every stride, one jewelled hand resting lightly on Arabella's arm, as if motherhood itself had been stitched into French satin. Sybil followed with a laugh that made two young officers turn at once. Linda came last, not announced, not offered to the receiving line. A gentleman near the staircase asked Lady Nielsen, loud enough for Linda to hear, whether the girl behind her was a companion. Lady Nielsen did not turn her head. "A household burden," she said with a small smile. "We are charitable people." The gentleman nodded as if charity were a spice to be admired in moderation. Linda removed her wet gloves and tucked them into her sleeve so no one would see the fingertips stained pink where skin had split. By the first week of November, she had learned exactly where to stand in every grand room so that she could be useful without being visible. Halberd House had 3 mirrored galleries, 2 retiring rooms, and a service corridor behind the musician's alcove where desperate hosts sent daughters, maids, and poor relations when the evening began to fray. Linda moved through those corridors as if she had been hired for them. She caught a tilting tray before 6 glasses struck the floor. She carried fresh napkins to a footman too new to ask for help. She found a needle in the ladies' retiring room and repaired a torn lace cuff while 2 matrons discussed engagement settlements as if the world were an account book that balanced itself for the right surnames. "Pull tighter," one of them told her, not looking down. "Your hands are clumsy." Linda's fingers were raw from lye and kitchen water. The knuckles cracked white. The nail of her left thumb split to the quick. She threaded anyway, pulled anyway, tied the knot small and clean. When she handed the cuff back, the woman said nothing. Gratitude was for equals. Hunger arrived in waves, then settled into a hard, dull ache behind her ribs. She had eaten half a heel of stale bread before dawn in the scullery, standing because there had been no time to sit. Lady Nielsen had said a heavy meal made a girl coarse and sleepy. At noon she had scrubbed candle grease from silver with salt and vinegar, while Arabella practised smiling in the looking-glass. At dusk she had mended Sybil's dancing slipper strap, while the sisters argued over which suitor looked wealthier in profile. Now violins lifted and dropped in the ballroom, and the smell of roasted pheasant drifted from the supper room in buttery waves that made her vision blur at the edges. She pressed 2 fingers to the sideboard until the room steadied. A passing maid, younger than Linda and frightened by the crowd, nearly dropped a tureen. Linda took the weight for 1 moment and passed it back before anyone noticed the exchange. The maid whispered a breathless thank you and disappeared into the crush. Linda remained where she was, hands hidden behind her skirt, pulse hammering too fast. Cruelty in Lady Nielsen's care was never theatrical. It was administrative. She withheld food without comment, reassigned shoes, removed coal from Linda's grate, and told the housekeeper it was an economy measure. She spoke of Linda as if inventory had become animate and inconvenient. "Do not place her near the front drawing-room." "No, she cannot sit at table tonight." "No ribbon for that one. She has no prospects." The words were never shouted. They did not need to be. They landed with the regularity of bells. Tonight she delivered each small correction with the fragrance of lavender trailing behind her, every movement arranged for observation. Once, passing close enough that only Linda could hear, she said, "Do stand farther back. Your face unsettles people when you look hungry." Then she turned and greeted a baroness with maternal warmth. Sybil glanced over her shoulder and laughed with 2 girls in pale green tulle. Arabella lifted Linda's borrowed fan from the side table and handed it to someone else without asking. Linda watched the fan go. It had belonged to her mother. Her father had taught her to read ledgers before she learned to dance. "Sit straight, Linda girl. Follow the column. Question the number that arrives too neat." The memory came not as comfort but as pressure beneath the breastbone. He had died in his study with winter rain at the panes, and debts hidden under polished silver trays that guests praised and appraisers measured. Her mother had remarried a titled widower who wanted order more than affection, and had died before the next winter ended, fever taking her in 3 days, while Linda still believed adults were permanent. Lady Nielsen had inherited the keys. Then the papers. Then the account that should have become Linda's at 21. One by one, Linda's mother's jewels vanished into auction rooms, and private hands to fund gowns, tutors, carriage upgrades, and seasons for daughters who had never known a hungry day. Linda's old schoolroom became Sybil's dressing chamber. Her books were boxed and sent to the attic except for 1 volume of Milton she hid under loose floorboard slats. London heard what Lady Nielsen wanted it to hear, that Linda lacked beauty, breeding, and gratitude. London repeated it because repetition was cheaper than thought. Stillness was Linda's practiced defence, but it was never surrender. In the attic she copied account columns by candle stub until wax burned her thumb and numbers doubled with fatigue. She memorised her father's cramped margin notes. She tracked dates, signatures, and the quiet drift of funds from charitable subscriptions into private milliners' bills. She folded each copied page into oilcloth and tucked them beneath a broken trunk lid where even curious maids did not reach. This was her private dignity, not embroidery, not flirtation. Arithmetic, ink, proof. In rooms like this, proof mattered less than pearls until the exact hour it mattered more than anything. She knew that with the certainty of bone. So she endured the weight of an empty stomach and the sting of wet wool at her wrists and the ache in her knees from standing through 3 quadrilles in shoes that pinched both heels raw. Endurance was what remained when every ornamental virtue had been denied her. Near midnight, a glass shattered in the card-room. Voices rose, then settled. A footman arrived breathless at the side passage, asking for extra towels and clean water in the retiring room. Linda fetched both without being told. She knelt on cold tile to mop spilled cordial from the hem of a countess's gown, while the woman complained to her companion that provincial households bred coarse girls who did not know their place. Linda kept her eyes lowered and wrung the cloth harder until water ran pink from her knuckles. When she rose, the room tilted again, this time sharply, and she caught the edge of a washstand before she fell. No one looked up. She breathed through her mouth, counted to 6, and waited for the wave to pass. Then she carried the basin back through the servants' corridor where heat from the kitchens struck her damp skin and made her shiver harder. When she returned to the ballroom doors, Lady Nielsen was waiting in the shadow beside a marble column, smile fixed, lavender heavy in the air. "You are late," she said softly. "Take this tray, the footmen are occupied. Do not spill, and keep away from the central floor. You darken the room." Linda accepted the silver tray. Its weight dragged at her wrists. Candles reflected in the polished surface around her face, pale and narrow and tired beyond 22 years. She moved into the crowd with careful steps, anonymous again, carrying crystal and fruit for people who had already forgotten she existed, while outside the rain kept falling against Halbert House, as if the night itself intended to wash her out of it. She moved with the tray balanced against her palms, weaving between brocade sleeves and polished boots, and every step reopened the skin at her heels, inside damp shoes that had never been hers. Crystal trembled against silver each time someone brushed her shoulder and did not apologize. A gentleman accepted a glass without looking at her face. A lady in amethyst satin took 2 sugared apricots and said to her companion, as if commenting on upholstery, "That is the Nielsen girl, is it not? Such a narrow little thing. One can always tell when blood has gone thin." Her companion made a soft sound of agreement and turned away. Linda kept moving. She had learned that silence was not meekness when it was chosen. It was conservation. It was the difference between finishing a night upright and waking on attic boards with her jaw split where she had fallen. The violins shifted into a faster figure. Heat from the chandeliers pressed down. The room smelled of beeswax, spilled wine, and expensive perfume that clung to the throat. Through an opening in the dancers, she saw Lady Nielsen near the card tables, laughing with her head tilted, lavender rising around her like a claim. Arabella stood at her right in pale gold silk that had been cut from the gown Linda's mother wore in her first season portrait. Sybil's throat shone with a small diamond drop that had once hung in a velvet case on Linda's mother's dressing table, wrapped in tissue and labelled for Linda in a hand, now buried 12 years deep in churchyard earth. Neither sister met Linda's eye. They had perfected that exclusion early, the smooth refusal to recognise possession unless it sat upon their own skin. A footman signalled for more glasses. Linda crossed toward him, her arms shaking from weight and hunger, and the rhythm of service settled over her like a harness. Lift, offer, turn, retreat. Do not stumble. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not exist beyond function. She passed a mirrored pier and caught herself in fragments. Pale cheek, dark hair pinned too hard, mouth set in a line her father would have called stubborn if he had lived long enough to see what stubbornness would cost. He had not been a grand man, not in the way these rooms counted grandeur, yet he had possessed the dangerous habit of writing down what other men preferred to smooth over. When he taught her sums at 9 years old, he had rapped the ledger margin with his knuckle and said, "A house does not collapse in a day, Linda girl. It collapses by tidy entries and polite lies." She heard the sentence now as if he stood behind her in the ballroom, ink on his fingers, lamp smoke in his coat, and for one disorienting breath she expected to turn and find him alive, broad-shouldered and impatient with waste. Instead, she found a stranger reaching for the last glass on her tray, ringed hand unsteady with drink, voice slurred with easy contempt. "You are the poor relation, yes. Smile when addressed." Linda gave him the practised half-bow due his rank and moved on before he could decide to make sport of her. Her stomach clenched so hard she thought she might retch. She swallowed against it. Father dead in his study while rain struck the panes. Mother dead before the second frost. The rest rearranged by people who called theft management and cruelty discipline. That ledger balanced perfectly in the eyes of society. She carried it in her bones, while music climbed and fell around her like weather. Lady Nielsen intercepted her at the edge of the supper-room and laid 2 fingers on the rim of the tray, the touch light enough to look affectionate from a distance. "You are drifting," she said, smiling with all her teeth. "Take this to the west retiring room. Lady Mowbray requires fresh water, and Arabella's lace has torn again. Do not stand in doorways. Men notice silhouettes before they notice sense." Linda inclined her head. "Yes, Lady Nielsen." The words came clean. They always did. The skill had taken years. In the west retiring room, 3 young ladies sat before a long mirror, while a maid knelt at their hems with pins in her mouth. Arabella held out her sleeve without turning, as if extending a hand to a seamstress who had no name. "There you are. Honestly, Linda, you vanish whenever there is work. Pull this thread free, not that one. Are you blind?" Sybil laughed from the settee, one slipper dangling from her toe. "She is not blind, Bella. She is tragic. It is different." Their friend covered a smile with her fan and asked, too brightly, "Is she truly your sister?" Arabella answered before Linda could move. "By an unfortunate first marriage, yes. We are kind to her." Kind. The word landed harder than an insult. Linda set down the water jug, found the loose lace at Arabella's cuff, and worked at it with stiff fingertips, while the room hummed with powder and gossip and the sweet metallic scent of heated curling tongs. Arabella shifted impatiently, and the diamond bracelet at her wrist scraped Linda's knuckles, opening one split seam wider. A bead of blood rose and disappeared into white lace. "Do not stain it," Arabella said under her breath. "I know that look. Do not begin your martyrdom face." Linda tied the thread with a surgeon's neatness and stood back. In the mirror she saw all 3 sisters at once, Arabella bright and composed, Sybil soft and malicious, Linda pale and straight in a gown altered down from someone else's waist. The contrast had been curated season by season, until even Linda sometimes forgot it was constructed. After her mother's funeral, when the house still smelled of black crape and extinguished candles, Lady Nielsen had taken Linda's chin between ringed fingers and studied her with practical distaste. "No one will marry you for beauty," she had said. "You will earn your keep by usefulness and silence." By spring, the schoolroom was emptied. Shelves gone, globe gone. Writing desk moved to Sybil's chamber because the light there was better for ribbon accounts. Linda's books boxed for storage, except those Lady Nielsen deemed respectable enough to display as inherited taste. At 14, Linda had asked for her own allowance and been shown legal papers instead, signatures and seals and the calm language of guardianship that turned possession into permission. At 18, she had asked again and been told she should be grateful to be housed at all. At 21, she had been informed that market conditions had necessitated temporary use of her dowry account, a phrase as bloodless as Winterbone, while Arabella acquired a Paris mantle and Sybil learned Italian songs from a visiting tutor paid in guineas Linda had never touched. In the retiring room, Sybil rose and adjusted the pendant at her throat. her fingers lingering possessively on the stone that had belonged to Linda's mother. "You stare," Sybil said. "Do not stare at things beyond your station." Linda lowered her eyes, because this too was arithmetic. Speak now, lose bed and bread. Speak later, with records, and the room changes. The maid at the hem looked up once, quick and uneasy, then dropped her gaze back to the pins. No one intervened. Intervening had a cost few people in silk were willing to pay. When Linda left the retiring room, the corridor felt colder, though the fireplaces on this floor burned high. She carried the empty jug and the torn thread in her pocket, a useless remnant she did not throw away. A quartet of gentlemen blocked the turn toward the service passage, discussing wages and county seats. She waited with her back to the wall until they moved, their coats smelling of damp wool and tobacco. Behind a half-open door she heard Lady Nielsen's voice, low and confidential, telling someone that Linda had a weak constitution and fits of sentiment, nothing serious, merely the consequence of inferior maternal stock. The lie was expertly chosen, not dramatic enough to challenge, not crude enough to offend, just sufficient to explain away any bruise a curious eye might notice, and any protest Linda might someday make. She walked on before they could see her listening. At the end of the passage, a narrow window overlooked the rear court, where rain needled the flagstones and lanterns quivered in the wind. She set the jug on the sill and flexed her fingers one by one. The joints ached. Skin pulled tight over cracked knuckles. Her hands looked older than her face, old enough for work, old enough for evidence. The house where she had been born stood 3 miles away and no longer answered to her name, sold to satisfy debts her father never confessed aloud while he still breathed. Even that grief had been managed for appearance. Lady Nielsen had kept the best mahogany sideboard and the silver épergne, citing family continuity, and sold the nursery chest because it was sentimental and therefore expendable. Linda remembered standing in the entrance hall as men carried furniture past her, each item tagged in ink, each departure a subtraction she was expected to watch with composure. She remembered her mother, already thin from coughing, whispering from her bed that numbers were not wicked, only those who hid behind them, then fever, then quiet, then winter without end. Since then, Linda had lived by columns. Cost of coal, price of ribbon, sums withdrawn from charitable funds, pledged in Lady Nielsen's name, sums redirected to dressmakers and jewellers, sums that matched, month by month, the widening confidence of 2 stepdaughters who believed prosperity to be a personal virtue. She had copied every entry she could touch, by candle stub in the attic, by kitchen fire when others slept, by memory when she could not risk paper. She had not done it from vengeance. Vengeance was hot and brief. She had done it because truth vanished quickly in houses like these unless someone wrote it down twice. A bell rang below stairs. She lifted the jug again and returned to the flow of service, shoulders back, breathing measured, each movement deliberate. The present pressed from all sides. Hunger, noise, orders, silk against her sleeve, the rough edge of old hurt under new humiliation. Yet beneath it all ran the harder current that had carried her this far. She knew where the money had gone. She knew whose signatures stood under each transfer. She knew the law would pretend deafness until a stronger voice demanded to hear, but she also knew records endured longer than mockery. In the ballroom doorway she paused just long enough to tuck one loose strand of hair behind her ear, and when she stepped inside again, she looked exactly as Lady Nielsen required. Quiet, useful, forgettable. Only her eyes refused forgetfulness. Only her eyes refused forgetfulness. And then a tray struck stone somewhere behind the musicians, with a crack so sharp the violins broke mid-phrase. Conversation shredded into gasps. A maid in grey livery pitched forward from the service door, silver platter spinning from her hands, crystal scattering in bright arcs across the parquet. She hit the floor on her knees, then folded hard against the leg of a gilt chair. For one stunned beat, no one moved except the dancers stepping back to protect satin hems. Linda set down her own jug and crossed the room at once, skirts catching on a chair corner, shoulder clipped by a startled gentleman who swore under his breath, as if she had offended him by hurrying. The maid's skin was ashen beneath powder. Her lashes fluttered once and stayed shut. Wine and broth soaked her apron. Linda slid an arm under her shoulders and lifted her enough to open the throat of the girl's collar. "Eliza, can you hear me?" No answer. Linda pressed 2 fingers to the maid's neck and found a racing pulse. Too fast, too thin. "Water," she said over her shoulder to the nearest footman. He did not move. He was looking past her toward rank. Lady Nielsen appeared from the edge of the crowd, lavender and silk, and controlled alarm. "Do not make a spectacle," she said through her smile. "Leave her. The house steward will attend." Linda already had Eliza's head in her lap, one hand supporting her jaw to keep her airway clear the way the old cook had taught her after a kitchen fall last winter. Someone laughed nervously. Someone muttered that servants were forever dramatic in warm rooms. Linda turned her face slightly and said, clear enough to carry, "She is fainting from exhaustion. She needs air and broth, not scolding." A murmur ran through the circle. Lady Nielsen's eyes flashed flat and hard. "Stand up this instant!" Boots struck marble from the gallery arch. 2 men in dark Rathmore livery cut through the ring of guests, broad-shouldered, expressionless, halberd insignia glinting at the collar. Behind them, taller by half a head than any man nearby, stood the Duke of Rathmore. Candlelight caught the scar that ran from his jaw toward his ear, pale against winter-brown skin. His coat was black, his cravat austere, his face set as if carved from wet granite. He looked first at the maid on the floor, then at Linda kneeling in spilled wine with her gloves off and blood bright at her knuckles, then toward Lady Nielsen as if calculating an offence and choosing the fastest remedy. His voice landed without effort, low and cutting through the entire room. "Escort Miss Nielsen out. Now." The command froze the nearest circle of guests into avid stillness. Linda felt Eliza stir weakly against her sleeve and forced herself to move before the moment swallowed the girl whole. She shifted Eliza toward the footman who had finally stepped forward, guided his hands into place, and said, "Keep her upright. Small sips only." Then she rose, palms sticky with broth and broken skin, and turned to the Duke for the first time at speaking distance. Up close he was colder than rumour, not loud, not theatrical, merely absolute. Storm-grey eyes, jaw tight enough to pull the scar taut. She understood immediately how many doors had opened at that face and how many lives had bent around that voice. She also understood that he had mistaken her. A poor relation kneeling among servants, a hostess's unwanted dependent at the centre of attention. Easy to remove, easier than asking questions in public. "I can walk," she said to the guards before they touched her. One of them inclined his head. "Miss!" She crossed the ballroom between them, not seized, not dragged, which only sharpened the humiliation because every gaze could pretend this was propriety. Music had not resumed. Shoes rustled as people shifted for better sight lines. She heard Sybil whisper to someone, and then a muffled laugh. Arabella's fan snapped shut. Lady Nielsen made a soft, regretful sound for the benefit of those closest, the sound of a guardian burdened by an unruly charge. Linda kept her spine straight and her hands folded at her waist to hide the shaking. Her cheek burned, though no one had struck her. The marble gallery seemed longer than before, mirrors multiplying her pale face beside two armed men, until she looked like a procession of dismissals. At the threshold she stopped and turned just enough to address the nearest steward. "Send broth to the west service room. The maid will collapse again without it." The steward glanced uncertainly toward the Duke. Adrian Vale did not answer him. He was still watching Linda with that fixed, unreadable concentration that felt less like attention and more like assessment under a blade. "Do as she said," he told the steward at last, never taking his eyes off Linda. The words were not gentle. They were still command. Yet they landed with a disorienting force because they proved he had heard her. Rain struck the courtyard flagstones in slanting silver lines when the doors opened. Cold air seized her lungs. The guards halted beneath the portico as etiquette required and released her to the weather outside the threshold. Behind them the doors shut with muted finality, sealing in heat chandeliers rank and all the people who would retell this scene before dawn as proof that order had been restored. Linda stepped down once, twice into the rain, and the wet reached her skin through satin at once. Her body had carried her through the gallery by discipline alone. Now the tremor in her knees turned violent. She pressed a hand to the stone balustrade and breathed through clenched teeth until the dizziness thinned. Bootsteps sounded behind her. Not the measured tread of guards. One man, unhurried, certain. She straightened without turning. "Miss Nielsen?" The Duke's voice was closer now, no echo of ballroom around it, only rain and empty court. She turned. He stood beneath the portico lamp, with water darkening his shoulders, hatless, dark hair slicked back from a hard brow. At this distance, the scar on his jaw looked older than gossip had made it, the kind earned young and carried without vanity. He did not apologize. Men like him had too much practice being obeyed to reach for apology first. "You were told to leave the floor," he said. "I was not aware a fainting girl constituted a floor." His eyes narrowed by a fraction. "You answer quickly for someone in no position to answer at all." "And yet I answer truly, Your Grace." The title tasted of iron in her mouth. She hated how naturally it came, how the body remembered hierarchy even while the mind resisted. He stepped down one stair, bringing them nearly level. Rain dotted his lashes and did not soften him. "Lady Nielsen informed my household that you were prone to scenes," he said. "Tonight confirms it." Linda felt the old familiar burn climb her throat, not tears. Rage contained too long and packed too tightly. She kept her voice even. "Lady Nielsen informs many households of useful fictions. I did not request your notice. I requested water for a servant." "You took command in my host's ballroom." She was losing consciousness. "You touched her in front of half the peerage." "She would have struck her head if I had not." His gaze dropped to her hands then, to split knuckles and the fresh line of blood along her thumb where lace wire had cut deep in the retiring room. It moved to her sleeve, damp and frayed at the cuff despite careful mending, to the hem dark with rain and older mud, to the tremor she could not fully still. When he spoke again, the tone had shifted only in temperature, from glacial to blade cold. "Are those injuries from tonight?" "No, Your Grace." "From your household?" Silence pressed between them. She could hear carriages on the far street and the rain ticking against harness metal. If she answered plainly, she invited war before she had standing. If she lied, she fortified Lady Nielsen's stories. He waited, as if waiting were a weapon he trusted. "My household is not your concern," she said at last. "Everything under this roof is my concern." She met his eyes then, really met them, and saw the second instinct beneath the first. Control weaponized as shelter, but still weaponized. "I am no longer under your roof," she said. A muscle in his jaw moved. "Not by choice, by your order." He took another step down, close enough now that she could see the fine rain on his coat collar and the faint exhaustion beneath his eyes, as if sleep had become occasional in his life, and no one dared comment. "You were where you should not have been. I was where your footmen were short. You imply my house cannot staff a ball. I imply your guests do not see servants until servants fall." For the first time his expression altered. Not a smile. Nothing that warm. A brief stillness, as if she had struck stone and heard a hairline crack answer back from within. Then the mask returned. "Who taught you to speak that way?" he asked. "My father taught me to describe what I see. Your father taught you insolence. He taught me arithmetic." Rain ran off the edge of the portico in steady sheets. Inside, muffled by doors, music started again, as if the interruption had been erased. The sound made something twist in her chest. Life resuming where she had been cut out of it. The Duke looked past her toward the gate and then back at her face. "You are shaking." "I am wet." "You are near collapse." "I have been near collapse since noon." The line slipped out before she could pull it back. She cursed herself inwardly. He heard it. Of course he heard it. Men trained to command armies noticed weaknesses the way bankers noticed unpaid sums. "Why?" he said. She almost laughed at the economy of that single word. Why hungry? Why bruised? Why useful and unclaimed at 22 in a borrowed mantle? Why standing in rain arguing with a duke instead of bowing and retreating? Too many truths, none safe. "Because that is the arrangement," she said, "with Lady Nielsen. With life as it has been allotted." "That allotment ends when I say it ends?" The sentence was so stark she stared at him, rain cold on her lashes, unable for a moment to decide whether he threatened or protected. He seemed to read the confusion and despise himself for causing it. He exhaled once through his nose hard. "Come back inside," he said. "You will not faint in my courtyard. I will not return where I was dismissed. You prefer the street. I prefer dignity. Dignity is not standing in sleet in torn satin. Dignity is deciding where I stand." They held each other's gaze while rain hammered stone. Behind him the doors opened a hand's width and a servant hovered, uncertain whether to interrupt. Adrian Vale did not turn. The servant closed the door again. When he spoke next, the command remained, but the edge had changed. "If I rescind the order publicly, will you come in?" She had not expected that. Not from this man, not after the ballroom, not in earshot of nobody but rain. Her pulse jumped painfully. "You would do that?" "I asked a question." "I heard it." She swallowed. Her throat hurt from cold. "No, Your Grace. No, no. Not while Lady Nielsen can call me spectacle and be believed." "Then what do you require?" The words arrived clipped, impatient, yet they were still words no one of his rank had ever offered her in earnest. "What do you require? Not what are you worth? Not what will you take?" She stared at him and felt the old, careful walls shift by a fraction she could not permit. "Send a physician to the West Service Room," she said. "Ensure the maid is paid for tonight, though she cannot finish her shift, and instruct your guards never to touch a woman as if she were furniture being removed." His gaze went to the guards at the door, then back. "They did not touch you, because I told them I could walk." "Others have not told them?" He gave one short nod, as if recording terms in an internal ledger. "Done." She had no reason to trust him. She trusted the tone instead, the one men used when decisions became action. "Thank you," she said, and hated the tremor on the second syllable. A new sound cut through rain then, light and rapid, silk against stone, unmistakable in a world where fabric announced rank before voices did. Linda turned toward the portico as the Dowager Duchess, Helena Vale, emerged without cloak. Silver hair unpowdered from haste, her face set in a line so severe that even the doorman stepped back. She looked first at her son, then at Linda's bleeding hands, then at the wet hem clinging to Linda's ankles. "This is not impropriety," the Dowager said, each word precise as a seal pressed into wax. "This is neglect." The rain seemed to pause to hear her. Dowager Duchess Helena Vale stepped fully into the weather, silk slippers darkening at once, and took Linda's right hand as if rank had no meaning at all when skin was split to the bone. Her fingers were warm, her grip was steady. She turned that same steadiness on her son. "Who gave this order?" she asked. Adrian did not flinch. "I did." "You will unmake what you have made." His jaw hardened. "Mother, you will not use that tone with me when a girl is bleeding in your courtyard." The words struck like stones dropped in still water. Linda felt the ripples in both of them. She tried to draw her hand back. Helena did not release it. "Miss Nielsen," the Dowager said, eyes on Linda now, "can you stand another 5 minutes?" "Yes, Your Grace." "That is not what I asked. Can you stand?" Linda swallowed. Her teeth had begun to chatter. "I can." "Then you will come with me to the West Service Room. If that maid has been left alone, I shall remove half this household before dawn." Adrian stepped down from the portico and moved to Linda's left, close enough that she felt the heat of him through wet wool. "You are shivering. Take my coat." She shook her head. "Give it to Eliza." His eyes sharpened at the name, at the fact that she knew the maid's name at all. He stripped the coat off anyway and held it out. Linda did not take it. Helena took it from him and draped it over Linda's shoulders, with a quiet, efficient movement that allowed no argument. "You may surrender your martyrdom for 10 minutes, the Dowager said. "Walk!" They crossed back through the side entrance instead of the ballroom doors. The service passage smelled of damp stone, lamp oil, and scorched sugar. 2 footmen flattened against the wall to let them pass, their faces rigid with the shock of seeing their Duke walking one pace behind a dismissed poor relation. Linda kept her gaze forward. She could feel Lady Nielsen's world rearranging itself, thread by thread, with every step. At the corner near the west corridor, lavender reached them first. Lady Nielsen appeared next, breathless from haste, yet perfectly arranged, pearls cool against her throat, concern painted to the exact degree politeness required. "Your Grace, what a distressing confusion," she said to Helena. "The girl has always been high-strung. I fear she overtaxed herself for attention." Linda felt Adrian go very still beside her. Helena did not slow. "If Miss Nielsen sought attention, Lady Nielsen, she selected a poor strategy. She chose a servants' corridor." Lady Nielsen gave a brittle laugh. "You are kind. I assure you she means no harm. She has a tendency to dramatise when gentlemen are present." Adrian spoke without turning his head. "Enough. One word. Flat. Final." Lady Nielsen's smile faltered, recovered and thinned. They reached the West Service Room, with the clock in the East Hall striking midquarter midnight, each bell note carrying through the stone like a measured warning. Inside, heat from a small range pressed against Linda's damp skin. Eliza lay on a narrow settle with a folded apron under her head, lips pale, one hand clenched in the blanket. The young footman who had carried her in stood nearby holding a cup he had not managed to use. "She woke once," he said, to no one in particular. "Then she retched. She cannot keep broth." Linda shrugged off Adrian's coat and went to the settle at once. She did not ask permission. She touched Eliza's forehead, then her wrist, then looked at the cup. "Too much, too fast," she said, "and too hot. Bring cool water, a spoon, salt." The footman darted toward the range. Lady Nielsen made a soft noise of disapproval. "Really, Linda, you are not a nurse." "No," Linda said, lifting Eliza's chin gently. "I am hungry enough to recognize another hungry body." Eliza's lashes fluttered. Her breath came shallow. Linda loosened the collar at her throat and pressed 2 fingers under the jaw hinge until the muscle released. Old Mrs. Davies in the kitchen had shown her that trick when a scullery boy had fainted beside the copper. "Press here, keep the airway open, never pour into a throat that cannot swallow." Helena moved to the opposite side of the settle and watched Linda's hands, not with suspicion but with full concentration. "Tell me what she needs." Warmth at her feet, a blanket rolled behind her shoulders. Small sips only when she can answer. "You heard her," Helena said to the room. Servants moved at once. One brought folded linen. Another fetched bricks from the range wrapped in cloth. No one looked at Lady Nielsen now. Linda lifted Eliza's hand and rubbed the fingers between her own to bring blood back to the tips. The skin was rough, nails bitten to the quick, thread burns across the first knuckles. Linda knew those hands. Not this pair only. All of them, every hand that carried trays, no one noticed. "Eliza," she leaned closer, "you are in the west room. You fell. You are safe. Squeeze my fingers." A weak pressure answered. Linda exhaled. "Good girl." The physician had not arrived. Rain and traffic and rank would all have excuses for that delay. Linda took the spoon when it came and stirred a pinch of salt into water with the smallest shaving of sugar from a kitchen cone. She had no sugar of her own left. She gave Eliza half of what little remained in her pocket, the last wrapped lump she had kept since dawn, to blunt a fainting spell of her own. Behind her, Lady Nielsen found her voice again. "This is touching, but unnecessary. My carriage is waiting. Linda will return home and rest. I will settle any staff concerns tomorrow." Linda didn't turn. "No." The word landed quietly. It did not need volume. Helena straightened. "She said no." Lady Nielsen's composure slipped for one heartbeat. "Your Grace, with respect, she is under my guardianship." "She is 22, Helena said, "and at present she is under my roof." Adrian had not spoken for several minutes. Linda had almost forgotten he was there. A dark line in the doorway, rain still on his boots. She was glad for that distance. She did not trust herself to meet his eyes while Eliza's pulse stumbled against her fingers. The footman returned with a clean cloth. Linda tore a narrow strip from the soaked edge of her own mantle instead, and wrapped Eliza's wrist where Crystal had cut skin in the fall. The cut was shallow. The fear was deeper. Eliza began to cry without sound, tears sliding into her hairline. "Hush," Linda murmured. "You did nothing wrong." "I dropped the tray," Eliza whispered. "I am sorry." "You collapsed," Linda said. "There is a difference." Lady Nielsen gave a low laugh, meant to be private, and failed to keep it so. "A philosophy of collapse? How useful!" Linda looked up then. Her face was bloodless with cold. Her eyes were not. "You asked me to carry 3 men's work on stale bread," she said. "You asked her to do the same on less. Mind your tone. My tone is the only thing in this house I still own." Silence followed. Helena's expression did not change, yet the room itself seemed to draw tighter around that exchange, every servant suddenly aware that speech had crossed some old invisible line. Lady Nielsen shifted tactics at once. Her smile returned, smaller and sharp. "Your Grace, this is exactly what I meant. She confabulates when fatigued. I fear she may also have misrepresented your son's conduct in the courtyard. Emotions distort memory." Adrian's gaze cut toward Linda. She felt it like a pressure at her shoulder. This was the opening Lady Nielsen wanted. A neat path to vengeance dressed as truth. Linda could take it. She could say he had humiliated her, that his guards had handled her roughly, that he had pushed her into rain and called it order. She could watch that accusation spread across titled faces by breakfast, watch his mother turn from him, watch the first crack widen in his authority. Part of her wanted that, the part that still felt the ballroom looking on while she walked between armed men. Eliza's fingers tightened weakly around Linda's sleeve. Linda looked down at them. Tiny burns from kitchen steam, a crescent scar by the thumb, working hands, defenceless hands. She heard her father again, not in comfort this time, but in instruction. Write it as it happened, or do not write it at all. She rose slowly from the settle and faced the room. His Grace dismissed me in public, she said, voice steady. That was an error. Adrian did not move. His guards did not lay hands on me. They obeyed when I said I would walk. His Grace ordered broth for Eliza when I asked. He offered shelter in the courtyard after I had been sent out. Those are the facts. Lady Nielsen stared at her, as if struck. Helena's eyes went to her son, then back to Linda, and something like respect settled in the deep lines around her mouth. Lady Nielsen recovered enough to hiss, "You ungrateful girl! After all I have?" "Provided," Linda asked, "a borrowed mantle in freezing rain, no supper, a place at no table. I thank you for clarity, if not kindness." "Linda," Helena said quietly, warning and approval braided together. Linda inclined her head and returned to Eliza, kneeling again. Her knees ached on stone. She did not care. She touched the spoon to Eliza's lip. "Sip, only a little." Eliza swallowed this time. Then another. Colour began faintly to return at her cheekbone. A carriage wheel rattled in the rear court. Moments later the physician arrived, grey-haired and wet-tempered, muttering about blocked streets until he saw who stood in the room and swallowed the complaint whole. He examined Eliza, asked 3 clipped questions, and finally nodded. "Who loosened the stays, kept her upright, and delayed hot broth?" he asked. Linda answered without looking up. "I did," he grunted. "Sensibly done. Another 10 minutes on her back, with a full cup, and she might have aspirated. Continue as you are." He prepared a tonic from his case and left instructions with the steward. Helena took the paper herself, read it, and handed it to the housekeeper with the weight of direct command. "Paid rest for 3 days," she said. "Kitchen broth every 4 hours. If anyone docks her wages, they answer to me." "Yes, Your Grace." Lady Nielsen made one last attempt, voice thin with contained fury. "This has become disproportionate. I must insist Linda return at once. Her sisters are unattended." Helena turned fully toward her. "Then your daughters will learn, perhaps, for the first time, to fasten their own gloves." Adrian finally stepped into the room. He had removed his cufflinks at some point, perhaps from habit, perhaps from restraint. His sleeves were damp at the wrists. He looked at Eliza, then at the torn strip of Linda's mantle bound around the maid's arm. Then at Linda's hands, still bleeding in narrow lines where old cracks had reopened. "You gave away your only dry cloth," he said. She answered without ceremony. "I had no use for dry cloth while she was shaking." His gaze held hers for a long moment, unreadable, except for one detail she could not misread. He was no longer seeing a burden attached to Lady Nielsen's name. He was seeing a mind that acted cleanly under pressure, a will that did not bend toward cruelty, even when cruelty would have served it. "Miss Nielsen," he said, formal as steel, "you will not leave in that condition." Lady Nielsen opened her mouth. He didn't look at her. "You may take your carriage home," he told her, Miss Nielsen remains as my mother's guest until morning. That is not your decision to make. It is precisely mine. Helena's voice entered before Lady Nielsen could answer. And mine. Rain tapped the window panes. The range fire settled with a low hiss. Eliza slept at last, breath even, one hand still tangled lightly in the edge of Linda's ruined mantle. Linda sat back on her heels, exhausted to the marrow, and felt the shape of the night altering around her in ways she had not sought and could not now refuse. Adrian took one step nearer and spoke so only she and his mother could hear. "You defended me when you had reason not to." Linda lifted her chin. "I corrected a lie. Do not mistake that for loyalty." His mouth tightened. Not quite a smile, not offence either. "Then I shall earn the difference," he said. The words hung in the warm service air, clean as a blade newly drawn, and Linda could not decide which unsettled her more, the promise itself or the fact that he had spoken it before his mother and the woman who claimed to own her. Lady Nielsen recovered first. She drew herself taller, silk rustling like dry leaves, and fixed Adrian with an injured dignity she had used to bend lesser men for years. "Your Grace, this has gone far enough. Miss Nielsen is fatigued and overwrought. She has embarrassed herself and my family. I shall take her home." "No," Adrian said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He turned toward the steward at the doorway, and the steward straightened as if pulled by a wire. "Captain Hargreaves is on duty," Adrian said. "Send for him." The steward vanished at once. Lady Nielsen's colour sharpened. "You overstep," Helena answered before her son could. "He stands in his own house." "In your own house, perhaps," Lady Nielsen said, "but not over my ward." Linda watched Adrian's face change by degrees too small for anyone not looking directly at him. The scar at his jaw tightened. A pulse moved once at his temple. His hands stayed quiet at his sides. "You have called her unstable to every drawing-room within 10 miles, he said. "You walked her through sleet behind your carriage. You denied her supper and worked her through the night. You will not speak of guardianship to me." Lady Nielsen gave a short, incredulous laugh. "On whose testimony?" "Hers." "On my eyes." The room held still around that sentence. Even the housekeeper, accustomed to storms in expensive clothes, went motionless beside the range. Adrian went on, each word precise. "I saw her bring in your daughter's torn cuff and mend it with bleeding hands. I saw her carry trays while my guests ate. I saw her steady 2 servants while you discussed ribbons. I saw her leave the ballroom between guards and ask for broth for a maid before she asked for herself. I do not require gossip when I was standing in the room." Linda felt heat rise under her skin that had nothing to do with the stove. She had not known he had seen those things. She had moved through that house as if invisible because invisibility had been safer. Now he named each small humiliation aloud and made it evidence. By the time the East Hall clock marked midnight, midnight, Captain Hargreaves had arrived, rain-dark coat beaded at the shoulders, hat under one arm. He halted on the threshold, took in the scene in one disciplined sweep, and bowed. "Your Grace." Adrian did not look away from Lady Nielsen. "Lady Nielsen and her daughters depart immediately. Provide escort to their carriage and ensure no member of that household enters this corridor again tonight without my express leave." Hargreaves inclined his head. "At once, Your Grace." Lady Nielsen's voice thinned. "You cannot bar me from a sick room when my own—" "I can bar anyone from any room in Halberd House," Adrian said. "Do not test me further." She turned to Helena as if the older woman might still be managed. "You would permit this discourtesy." Helena's expression did not change. "Discourtesy was permitting you through the first door." For a moment Lady Nielsen stood very still, gauging whether one final strike might recover ground. Her eyes found Linda, narrowed and filled with a bright, poisonous promise of later retaliation. Then she saw Hargreaves step half a pace closer, and calculation replaced fury. "This is not finished," she said. Linda met her gaze and answered in the same low register. "No, it is documented." Lady Nielsen flinched as if the word itself had hit her. Then she gathered her skirts and moved from the room under guard, pearls cold at her throat, lavender trailing behind like a false memory. When she was gone, the pressure inside Linda's ribs shifted so abruptly she had to brace one hand against the settle. Eliza slept on, unaware, breath soft and regular. The physician's vial sat capped on the table, its bitter smell mingling with wet wool and coal smoke. Helena crossed to the door, gave 2 quiet instructions to Hargreaves in the corridor, and returned. "Arabella and Sybil are in their carriage. They leave within minutes. There will be no scene in the front hall." "Thank you, Your Grace," Linda said. Helena looked at her for a long beat. "You have thanked too many people tonight for what should have been yours without asking." Linda had no answer for that. Gratitude had been her one permitted currency for so long that she used it even when it scraped her raw. Adrian had not moved from where he stood near the table. Not once since Lady Nielsen left. He seemed carved into the floorboards, dark coat open at the throat now, wet cuffs drying stiff at his wrists. His stillness was not indifference. It was a tension held under iron restraint. Eliza stirred and made a small sound in her sleep. Linda bent at once, adjusted the blanket, and checked the maid's pulse again. Better. Still weak, but no longer racing itself toward collapse. "She will need broth before the hour turns," Linda said to the housekeeper. "Not rich stock. Thin first, then thicker." The housekeeper nodded. "It is already on the stove, miss." Miss. The word landed oddly. Not girl, not that one. Miss. Linda rose too quickly and the room tilted. The stove, the settle, Helena's face all drifted 1 inch to the left. She caught the edge of the table and held it until the floor steadied beneath her feet. "Sit," Adrian said. It came out as command. It sounded like command. Yet he had taken 1 step forward when she swayed, and his hand lifted, then stopped in the air as if he had forced it still by will alone. He did not touch her. I am all right," she said. "You are not. I can stand. You have stood for 12 hours. She looked up sharply. "How would you know that?" "Because you entered the house at 9 with rain on your hem and no gloves fit for weather." His voice remained even. "You were in the west corridor at 10:15, with a water jug too heavy for your frame. You were in the retiring room at 11 with blood through your thumb seam. You have not sat since." Helena watched them both in silence, and for the first time Linda understood that this was not ordinary intervention, not nobles performing benevolence for an audience. There was no audience here, only heat, damp stone, sleeping servants, and a duke confessing by inventory that he had tracked her all night. Linda felt anger rise in defense of herself, swift and hot. "If you watched so closely, why did you send me out?" The question struck him visibly. His shoulders stayed square. His expression did not break, but the answer took a full breath longer than any he had given before. "Because I thought you were part of her arrangement," he said. "Because I saw you where you should not have been and reached for order instead of truth." His eyes held hers, storm grey and unguarded for one narrow second. "I was wrong." Silence followed. Not polite silence, not empty, the kind that reshaped a room. Helena looked down, adjusted Eliza's blanket one final inch, and moved toward the door with deliberate quiet. She paused beside Linda and touched her arm lightly. "I shall check on the kitchens," she said. "Captain Hargreaves is outside. No one enters without permission." Then she left, taking the housekeeper with her, and closing the door until only a narrow wedge remained open to the corridor light. Linda and Adrian stood 3 paces apart with a sleeping maid between them, and rain whispering at the panes. Linda could hear his breathing, slow, controlled, too controlled. He glanced at the torn edge of her mantle, then to her hands again. "Where is the rest of your bandage cloth?" "I used it. I can see that, for her." "Yes." His jaw tightened. "You're bleeding through your own sleeve." She looked down. Thin lines of red had reopened at 2 knuckles, where skin had split from cold and lie. She had forgotten pain in the urgency of work. Now it came back in clean stings. "It is nothing." "Liar!" The word was quiet, almost weary. "Your hands are split to the tendon line. Your right heel has bled through your stocking since before midnight. You have eaten almost nothing today. Do not tell me it is nothing." No one had ever spoken to her body as if it were real and legible and worth naming. The bluntness felt intimate in a way gentleness never had. She set her mouth. "I will tend it when Eliza wakes." "You will tend it now." She is sleeping. She may aspirate if she rolls. "I will watch her." "You do not know what to look for." His gaze did not leave hers. "Tell me." The single demand stopped her. She hesitated, then gave in to necessity and instruction. If her breathing catches, lift her shoulder, not her chin. If she coughs, turn her to the left. Small sips only, no more than a spoon each quarter hour. Keep her warm at the feet. He nodded once. "Done?" She should have moved then. She should have sat and cleaned her hands and preserved what little strength remained. Instead, she stood where she was, refusing because refusal had been her last defence for too long to surrender quickly. Adrian exhaled through his nose, the first sign of impatience. "Miss Nielsen!" "Your Grace, do not make this harder." She almost answered that hard was the one language she spoke fluently, that compliance had never protected her from anything except immediate punishment, but he was already crossing to the washstand. He poured clean water into a basin, tested it with his wrist, then set it on the table with folded linen beside it. The movements were efficient and awkward at once, like a man trained for battle, improvising in a sick room. "Sit," he said again, quieter now. She sat. The chair felt unsteady under her. Her knees shook once and then locked. Adrian remained standing across from her, hands braced on the table edge, watching without speaking as she removed the torn gloves and lowered her fingers into warm water. Pain flared sharp and immediate. She hissed through her teeth. He did not move. The stillness lengthened 1 minute, then 2. Eliza breathed softly on the settle. Rain eased against the glass. Somewhere far off, a door closed and boots crossed stone, muffled by distance. Linda cleaned each cut with practiced care, tore a strip from unused linen, and wrapped her knuckles tight enough to hold, loose enough to bend. When she reached for the second strip, her hand trembled too badly to knot it. The cloth slipped. Adrian's hand lifted again, stopped again. "May I?" She stared at the offered hand. Scarred knuckles, long fingers, rain-damp cuff. A hand that had pointed and sent guards to remove her an hour before. A hand that had ordered her tormentor from the house 20 minutes ago. "Do not mistake this," she said, voice low. "I do not belong to your mercy." His answer came at once. "Good. Mercy is fickle. This is not." She let him take the cloth. He knelt to bring himself level with her hand instead of drawing her up to him. The choice was so deliberate it robbed her of breath for a moment. His fingers were warm and astonishingly careful as he wound linen around her palm, crossed the split at her thumb, and tied off with a soldier's neat knot that would not loosen when wet. He did the second hand the same way. No wasted touch, no lingering. When he finished, he did not rise at once. He stayed where he was, eyes on the bandages, shoulders rigid, as if movement might crack something he had only just managed to hold together. "I sent you out," he said, finally, still looking at her hands. "I cannot take that back." "No. I can do this instead. You do not return to Lady Nielsen's authority. Not tomorrow, not after breakfast, not at all." Her pulse jumped hard at her throat. "You cannot decide my life by decree." "I am not deciding your life." He looked up then, and the force of his gaze pinned her in place. "I am drawing a line no one crosses again." He rose in one controlled motion and turned towards the half-open door. "Captain Hargreaves!" he called. The captain appeared at once. "From this hour," Adrian said, voice carrying into the corridor, "Miss Linda Nielsen is under veil protection. She is to be admitted and escorted as my mother is admitted and escorted. No person from Lady Nielsen's household approaches her without my mother present. Record the order in the night book and have it copied to Rathmore House before dawn." Hargreaves did not blink. "Yes, Your Grace." He withdrew. The room went very quiet again. Linda sat with bandaged hands in her lap and stared at Adrian, unable to soften what she felt into one name. Fear, relief, anger, recognition, all of it at once. "You just set half London on fire," she said. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile and gone at once. "Then let it burn where it should have burned years ago." On the settle, Eliza stirred and coughed weakly. Adrian moved first, exactly as instructed, lifting her shoulder, turning her left, waiting until the cough passed. He looked back at Linda only when Eliza's breathing eased. "Broth," he said. "Now." The command was for the corridor, but his eyes stayed on Linda, and for the first time in her memory, she obeyed a command without feeling erased by it. "Broth," he said. "Now." Linda lifted the spoon with bandaged fingers and steadied Eliza's shoulder while Adrian held the cup, his large hand careful against chipped porcelain. Eliza swallowed, coughed once, then took a second spoon without choking. Colour began to return at the edges of her mouth. The housekeeper, summoned by a knock and a murmur through the door, took over with quiet competence. Linda rose on unsteady legs, wiped the spoon dry, and only then felt how deeply exhaustion had sunk into her bones. Captain Hargreaves appeared again at the threshold, reins still on his collar. "Your Grace, the carriage has not departed. Lady Nielsen refuses to leave without Miss Nielsen. She is causing a disturbance in the North Hall." Helena returned behind him, face calm and hard. "Bring her to the Blue Morning Room. Bring her daughters as well, and send for Mr. Ames from Bow Street. He is dining here tonight and has not yet left." Linda looked sharply at the dowager. Ames, the magistrate whose name appeared on charitable subscription lists. Lady Nielsen had forged twice in the last year. Helena caught the look and gave the smallest nod, as if they had already agreed without speaking. By 1 in the morning, the Blue Morning Room held too many truths for its polished walls. Lady Nielsen stood near the mantel, wet silk clinging at the hem, Arabella and Sybil pale behind her. Mr. Ames sat at a writing table with a travelling inkstand open. Adrian stood by the door like a closed gate. Helena took the seat at the head of the room and indicated a chair for Linda at her right, not below the salt, not in the shadows, but in full light. Lady Nielsen drew breath for outrage. Helena lifted one hand and stopped her. "Miss Nielsen," Helena said, "you told me in the corridor that matters were documented. Tell this room what you meant." Linda felt every eye turn toward her. Her heart struck hard once, then steadied. "I copied household ledgers," she said. "Withdrawals from my dowry account, transfers from charitable subscriptions pledged in Lady Nielsen's name, dates, amounts, signatures." Arabella made a strangled sound. Sybil whispered, "You went through Mother's desk." "No," Linda said. "I went through account books I was ordered to carry." Lady Nielsen laughed, too bright. "Childish fabrication. She has always played at figures." Mr. Ames dipped his pen. "Where are these copies, Miss Nielsen?" "In a broken trunk in the attic at Nielsen House, wrapped in oilcloth beneath the false bottom. My father's marginal notes are with them. There is also a list of pledged charity subscriptions never delivered." Adrian spoke to Hargreaves without looking away from Lady Nielsen. "Take 2 men. Fetch the packet. Mr. Ames's clerk goes with you." Lady Nielsen stepped forward. "You cannot send guards into my house." Mr. Ames answered in a dry, level tone. "I can. I do." He signed a brief warrant sheet and sanded the ink. Hargreaves took it and left at once. Rain thinned against the windows. The fire settled. No one touched the tea set, laid out for comfort and ignored by all. Lady Nielsen tried again, lower now. "Linda, think carefully. You are tired, you're confused. Say there was a misunderstanding and we shall go home." Home. The word was a key turned in an old lock. Linda saw the attic boards, the missing books, the fan taken from her hand, her mother's pendant at Sybil's throat, her father's voice over ledgers by lamplight. "There was no misunderstanding," she said. "There was arithmetic." 2 hours later, just before 3, Hargreaves returned with the clerk and a mud-stained trunk panel wrapped in sacking. He set it on the table. Mr. Ames opened the oilcloth himself. Folded sheets, tight columns in Linda's hand, dates aligned with bank receipts. A second packet of letters tied in blue thread. A jeweller's bill for Arabella's bracelet marked "Paid from the Nielsen Ward Trust." A milliner's invoice matched to a charity disbursement that never reached St. Anne's orphan account. Her father's old notes in the margins, cramped and furious where sums failed to reconcile. Mr. Ames read in silence for several minutes. Then he lifted one sheet. "Lady Nielsen, this signature appears to be mine on a disbursement I did not authorise." Lady Nielsen said nothing. He placed that sheet beside another. "And this one is Lord Halbert's, also false by hand pressure and stroke direction." Arabella sat down abruptly. Sybil began to cry in short, angry breaths. From the pocket of her skirt, Linda drew the torn thread she had kept from Arabella's cuff and laid it beside the ledgers, an absurd small relic of the night's labour. "I mended while funds were stolen," she said quietly. "That is the proportion of it." Mr. Ames set his pen down. "Lady Nielsen, you are charged provisionally with fraud, misappropriation of trust funds, and assault if the witness statement supports it. You will come with the officers now." Lady Nielsen moved so quickly that no one saw intention until her hand was already in the air. The slap cracked across Linda's cheek. Pain flashed white along her jaw. Helena rose. Arabella cried out. Sybil went silent in shock. Adrian crossed the distance in 2 strides and caught Lady Nielsen's wrist before she could strike again. His voice was low enough to chill the room. "How dare you touch the future Duchess of Rathmore?" Silence followed, dense and absolute. He released Lady Nielsen only when Mr. Ames's officers took hold of her arms. She did not plead. She stared at Linda with naked hatred as they led her to the door. "This will ruin you," she said. Linda touched her burning cheek with the back of her bandaged hand. "It already ruined you," she answered. "I only wrote it down." The door shut behind the officers. The sound ended one life and began another. By dawn, the legal clerk from Ames's office sat with Helena in the same blue room and drafted the immediate orders. Temporary guardianship of Linda's affairs transferred out of Lady Nielsen's control pending formal hearing. All known assets in the ward trust frozen, an inventory of jewellery and movable property to be prepared and cross-checked against invoices. Arabella and Sybil, white-faced and sleepless, signed acknowledgement papers and accepted escorted travel to an aunt in Bath whose means were modest and whose tolerance for extravagance was smaller still. Linda signed last. Her hand shook once over her name, then steadied. Ink blackened the paper. The line was clean. When the clerk left, Adrian remained by the window, coat changed, cravat retied, as if discipline could erase the night from his face. It had not. He turned to Linda and, at Helena's deliberate gesture, stepped into the centre of the room, where servants, steward, captain, and Mr. Ames still stood. He spoke to them all, not only to her. I gave an order in that ballroom that dishonoured Miss Nielsen. I judged rank before truth. I was wrong. He turned fully to Linda then. Miss Nielsen, I ask your pardon before witnesses for having you escorted out. Her throat tightened. This was the apology she had demanded without naming, no private murmur, no softened revision, words in public where harm had been done. You have it, she said, for that act and no other. A faint shift at his mouth, not relief, acceptance. That is just. Helena watched both of them, eyes bright with fatigue and fierce satisfaction. Then we proceed properly, she said, not by coercion, not by rescue theatre. Adrian nodded once. Miss Nielsen, when you're rested and free in law, I will ask to court you formally. If you refuse, the protection stands unchanged. Linda looked at him for a long moment. Her cheeks still burned. Her hands still hurt. Eliza slept safely 2 corridors away, with wages promised and broth by the clock. Her father's notes lay open on a table where men of law had read them and believed them. You may ask when I am rested, she said. You may not command. I understand. Helena rose, took Linda's ruined borrowed mantle from the chair where it had dried stiff with smoke and rain, and folded it with surprising care. This goes to the fire, she said, not as erasure, as end. Linda shook her head. Keep one strip, Helena paused. Why? To remember the price of being believed. Helena handed her a narrow torn ribbon of a satin from the hem. Linda folded it and placed it beside her father's notes in the oilcloth packet. Every physical proof accounted for, every page witnessed. At first light, a Rathmore carriage carried them across the wet city. The sky had not cleared, but the rain had softened to silver mist. Linda sat beside Helena, the oilcloth packet in her lap. Adrian opposite, with his hands bare and still on his knees. No one spoke during the last turn up the drive. Rathmore House rose from the morning like dark stone pulled from water. The front doors stood open, not the servants' side gate, not the rear passage, the front. Adrian stepped down first and did not offer his hand until Linda reached the carriage step and looked at him. She placed her fingers in his for balance only, then released him at once. Together, with Helena at her other side and Captain Hargreaves bearing the packet of ledgers behind them, Linda entered through the front doors at dawn as an acknowledged equal